Today, we're going to discuss how a series of economic and political crises in the year 1819 will effectively bring an end to this era of good feelings that we've been talking about for the past couple of sessions. To begin with, the economic prosperity that had characterized the previous several years is going to come to an end with the panic of 1819. And a panic is just another word for an economic recession. And this is the first one that we're really going to see. There'll be several more over the course of the next 30 or 40 years. And of course, if you take part 2 of U.S. history, there'll be more. Every few years or so, every 20 or 30 years, there's an economic recession, a major recession. And this is part of an economic cycle that the U.S. goes through, a boom and bust cycle, periods of rapid prosperity and growth, followed by sudden contraction of the economy and recession. So this panic of 1819 is going to pretty much mark the end of this period of rapid growth and economic prosperity from the previous years. And a lot of this is going to revolve around cotton. Just like we had discussed in the last session with the Industrial Revolution and how cotton played a very important role in that economic growth, cotton here is going to be at the center of this economic crisis as well. While cotton was in high demand, and especially after the cotton gin and those years that followed, we saw this rapid expansion of cotton production. What will happen is that a lot of people will begin investing in land on the frontier for the purpose of building new cotton plantations or expanding existing ones. So the rise in the price of cotton leads to land speculation. Land speculation is just people investing in land for the purpose of making a profit. People will buy land at a low price, anticipating the increase in price due to demand for cotton. And then they'll sell off bits and pieces of this land to prospective plantation owners who are going to start cotton plantations. People will buy small pieces of land expecting to plant cotton and of course make a lot of money in return. So the word speculation is essentially a fancy word for gambling. They're taking a risk here. They're gambling on the price of cotton remaining high and bringing them a significant return on their investment. The banks will play a very important role here too, in that many of the state and local banks will offer credit on very easy terms. No collateral, no background check, just you come in and apply for a loan, we'll give you the money, you go buy your land, grow some cotton, and you make a fortune, and then you can pay us back our loan and still have plenty of money left over. And banks are making a lot of money on this too. A lot of banks will buy land, anticipating this rise in the value of land, and they'll sell land to investors, to people who are looking to start new plantations. So this land speculation based on a high price of cotton is a big thing. Today they would refer to it as a real estate bubble. We see a rapid expansion of demand for new land on the frontier, and we're talking about the Mississippi, Alabama, that region, western part of Georgia. A lot of people are buying land down there. During this time period, we see a lot of this growth. So in the years prior to 1819, there was this rapid expansion of land speculation and easy credit, and basically what we're talking about here is state and local banks are loaning out money on easy terms, and this is part of the problem, is the irresponsible lending habits of some of these banks. Now our Bank of the United States, the federal bank, they make loans too, but they only issue gold or silver coins. The state and local banks, which are completely unregulated, there are no rules governing banking practices in 1819. State and local banks will very often issue paper banknotes or paper currency as a as an alternative to gold or silver coin. They'll have gold or silver coin in the vaults, and they'll issue bank notes. Basically, they're only good at that bank for their loans. And what ends up happening is that some of these unregulated state and local banks, they get greedy. It's a business. They're trying to make a profit, so they will make more loans than they have gold or silver to cover. Because the banks are assuming here, again, this speculation. The banks are assuming that, okay, we'll make all these loans to these potential cotton farmers. We'll loan out more money than we can cover, but it's not a problem because these people will make all kinds of money on cotton, and they'll be able to pay us all back the money they owe us, and we won't. Yeah, there's a risk, but the potential payoff is big. So if it pays off, we won't have to worry about this. The fact that we don't have enough money to cover all these loans. But then a lot of people will do the same thing too. They'll borrow money with no collateral. Okay, I have no way of paying back this loan except for the money I think I'm going to make growing cotton. And so everybody is gambling at every level here. The Bank of the United States, they don't loan money to individual investors. They loan money to other banks, but it's always in the form of gold or silver. So what happens is that in this fragile situation of land speculation, you rapidly rising cotton prices, you people are gambling on the value of land, and as banks loaning out easy credit loans. This is basically, we've got a situation for a perfect storm here. All the ingredients are in place for a disaster, and that disaster comes in about the middle of 1819 when the price of cotton suddenly starts to drop. And we're talking about in the world market. Most of the cotton being grown in the United States ends up in England. A lot of it's going to our textile mills in the northern cities, northern states, but most of the southern cotton is going to England. England is still the largest consumer of cotton in the Atlantic market. What happens, though, is that in the years prior to this, England had bought so much cotton from southern states that their warehouses were full. Keep in mind, England still buys a lot of cotton from India and Egypt and other places. They have colonies there as well. So America isn't the only source for cotton for British textile industry. What ends up happening, though, is the British textile industry is at capacity. They've got all the cotton that they need. Their warehouses are full. There's a glut of cotton in the British textile market, so they don't need any more. So they stop buying. When demand for cotton suddenly dries up, the price of cotton is going to start going down. It's going to start going down very rapidly. And this is just the nature of economics. When demand diminishes, so does the price, especially if supply is high. You've got a large supply of cotton that you need to get rid of. There's not a lot of demand for it, so you start lowering the price in order to sell this cotton to at least sell it at any price to get some of your money. So that's what happens. The price of cotton starts to drop very rapidly. This sets off a chain reaction. When the price of cotton goes down, so does the value of land, because a lot of the value of land was based on the potential profits for cotton plantations. When that no longer is a possibility, the value of the land begins to drop as well. And here's where things really start to get troublesome. What happens is that when the price of land goes down, these people who had invested heavily in land, the banks who had bought up a bunch of land, these private investors or speculators who had bought up a bunch of land, they realize that they're no longer going to be able to sell this land to get the money they need to pay off their loans. The land that they purchased is now worth less than it was when they purchased it. So even if they were able to sell the land now, they would sell it as a loss, which means they're not going to be able to pay back the money that they borrowed from the bank. The banks are not going to be able to cover all of their investments as well. So what ends up happening is that as this starts to unravel, as the price of cotton is going down, the value of land is going down, a lot of people are unable to pay back the loans or pay for the land that they borrowed to purchase. a lot of banks start calling in their loans. The banks are afraid that they're going to lose all their money, so they start, oh, hey, we've loaned you money, we need that money back right now. Even the Bank of the United States, who had made loan to some of these other smaller banks, of course, they see the writing on the wall. They say, all right, we got to start calling in some of our loans if we want to keep from losing a fortune here. So the Bank of the United States starts calling in some of its loans, basically demanding that some of these smaller banks pay back what they owe them. So some of the smaller banks, they pay back some of the money, the gold and silver that they owed the U.S. bank, because the U.S. bank won't take paper banknotes. They only deal in gold and silver. So some of the smaller banks, they give back all the gold and silver to pay off their loans. And when the people, of course, the people come to the bank to get their money out, there's no money there to be distributed, because the banks, these little banks, have loaned out more money than they have in their vault. So a lot of these banks will default on their loans. They don't have enough money to pay back what they owe the federal government. The individual investors, they come to the bank to draw out money. The bank doesn't have any more money. A lot of people are trying to, that's why they call it a panic, because this chain reaction causes people to, it makes people afraid. Even people that have not invested in land speculation, just private investors, okay, I've got some money in the bank downtown, and this economic situation looks like it's going to be scary. I better go down there and get my money out of the bank before things get really bad. You go down to the bank to get your money, the bank says, we don't have any more. So I put $100 of gold in here last year. The bank's like, we don't have that anymore. And you're like, where is it going? Well, we used it to pay off some other loans, and basically you're out of luck, because there's no regulations that govern how banks lend money, and the requirement to maintain a certain amount of funds for their investors or their depositors. So a lot of people are going to lose everything here. The land speculators are going to lose pretty much everything. The banks that loaned out the easy credit, and of course the banks that themselves purchased land with the intent on making profit, they're going to lose everything. Some banks will close up altogether. Even people who did not participate in land speculation, they're going to lose money too, because when they go to get their money out of the bank, it's just simply not there anymore. But the only bank that will weather this storm without closing up really is the Bank of the U.S., because they only dealt in gold and silver. They didn't use paper currency. They didn't loan anything out that they didn't have covered in their vault. So they got out early enough to protect their deposits, and of course they never made any of these irresponsible loans to begin with. So the Bank of the United States will weather the storm. Some of the larger state banks and larger privately owned banks will weather the storm all right too, but the ones that take the biggest hit are the small local banks, some of the smaller state banks, and these fly-by-night financial institutions that here today, gone tomorrow, that kind of thing. So what ends up happening is that this panic, this collapse of the cotton market, and the land or the real estate bubble bursting, and all these loans defaulting, we're going to end up in a major economic recession. Because when people don't have money, they don't buy things, and when they don't buy things, the people who sell things, their business suffers as well. Even if you had nothing to do with this land speculation, you own a general store or a grocery store or something like that. People are not buying stuff at your general store because they don't have money anymore. So your business is gonna suffer as well. And like I say, even the people who did not invest anything, they just had their savings in the bank, and the bank had irresponsibly loaned out that money and couldn't get it back. Those people are going to lose things too. So this is going to hit everybody. It's going to be a nationwide economic recession, and this is pretty much the end of our era of good feelings. Nobody's feeling very good at this point because of this economic recession. The collateral damage of this economic crisis is that it hits some people harder than others. Primarily the people who lost money here are cotton plantation owners. people who were gambling on the continued high price of cotton, this land speculation. Most of the people buying land were buying land with the intent of growing cotton. So for obvious reasons, this is going to hit Southerners much harder than Northerners. Northerners don't grow cotton, so this land speculation over cotton is never really a thing in the North. So Northerners aren't really going to get hit hard at all about this. They'll take a hit in the general overall recession, but in terms of losing everything over land speculation, that's not going to be an issue in the North. Mostly in the South, and of course in those southwestern states, Mississippi, Alabama, western part of Georgia, and so forth. Southern part of Tennessee. Those frontier areas are going to get hit the hardest with this economic recession, because it's there where people risked everything on the price of cotton. Now, this will become a sectional issue. It starts out as an economic issue that affects the nation, but it's going to end up morphing into a sectional issue, contributing to this North versus South tension. And the reason it does that is because a lot of people, especially in the South and on the frontier, are suspicious of banks anyway. They don't trust banks because banks are seen as servicing the interests of the wealthy at the expense of the poor or the working classes. So there's kind of a class issue, this tension over banks in general. Well, the biggest bank in the nation is in the North, the Bank of the United States, one of the few banks that was able to remain solvent throughout this crisis. So the Bank of the United States still has vaults full of money, where these small banks and these frontier people lost everything. So a lot of people make a false comparison here, false correlation. They say, okay, I don't have money. I lost all my money in this land deal. The Bank of the United States still has all their money. They profited from my loss. It's their fault. And this false assumption that a lot of people make, especially the people who lost everything, they tend to blame the banks. And while some of the small state and local banks do share a large part of the blame here for making those irresponsible loans and gambling on land speculation with the deposits of their clients, the Bank of the United States didn't really have anything to do with this. They did not participate in those reckless lending habits. They only dealt in gold and silver coins. They didn't loan out more money than they had in the vault. And when things started looking like they were coming apart, the Bank of the United States stopped making loans at all, which basically just kind of basically prevented them from losing any more money. So people tend to blame the banks. And since the Bank of the United States is the biggest bank and it's located in the North, and since the Northerners weren't really affected by this, a lot of people from the South, especially in the western areas, they tend to look at this as this is all the fault of the Northerners. Those rich Northerners back east in that Bank of the United States, these wealthy elites who have profited from our loss. We lost everything out here. People lost their farms, they lost their houses, they lost everything. And since the Northerners and the Bank of the United States didn't really lose anything here, they all tend to look at it as their fault, which of course is not true, but it's a perception thing. If I've lost everything and you have gained something, I'm going to assume that everything I lost, you gained. What you gained was because of my loss. And that's not really the case here. Basically, this is a case of people have gambled, and again, the word speculation is just a fancy word for gambling. People gambled on this potential for easy profit, and they lost. And there's a lack of willingness to acknowledge the individual responsibility here. People don't want to admit that they rolled the dice and they lost. It's easier to blame someone else. And this blame naturally feeds into this already existing sectional tension between the frontier and the established eastern cities, and of course the North versus South. So this panic of 1819 and the recession that follows is going to contribute to an already growing sectional tension between an economically prosperous industrial North and a South who is now taking a hit as a result of this cotton market, or this cotton bubble, or this land bubble that we just experienced. So we've got a lot of sectional tension as a result of this. Now the economy will recover, demand for cotton will increase, and everything will bounce back, within a few years. But initially, this panic is going to contribute significantly to a sectional tension. That sectional tension is going to be further aggravated with another issue concerning the bank in a Supreme Court case of McCulloch versus Maryland, also in 1819. So in the midst of this economic recession that's unfolding, the Supreme Court is going to hear a case specifically addressing the Bank of the United States. What ends up happening in this particular case, the state of Maryland passed a law that placed a tax on any non-state bank. So basically, any bank within the state of Maryland, which is not an institution of the state of Maryland, is going to be taxed. So these private and locally owned banks, and of course, there's a branch of the Bank of the United States in Maryland, in Baltimore. So all of these banks are going to have to pay this new Maryland tax, this bank tax. Well, what ends up happening is that the branch manager of the U.S. Bank in Baltimore, a guy named James McCulloch, he's going to refuse to pay this Maryland state tax. In his mind, okay, the state of Maryland cannot tax the Bank of the United States, which is an institution of the federal government. U.S. state government cannot tax the federal government. This is McCulloch's argument. So, of course, Maryland is just trying to protect itself against any kind of non-state banks. So all these private banks in the state of Maryland, they've got to pay this tax. And of course, Maryland assumes also that the Bank of the U.S., which is not a Maryland state bank, will also have to pay this tax. So Maryland is just trying to do what it does as a state government. Is trying to implement a tax policy. The U.S. Bank branch president, James McCulloch, doesn't agree, and he refuses to pay this tax. Well, since it is a case concerning the federal, an institution of the federal government, the Bank of the United States, this case will end up in the Supreme Court. McCulloch versus the state of Maryland. McCulloch, the branch representing the Bank of the United States, versus the state of Maryland. So what's going to happen here is that this case is going to bring up two important questions. One, we're going to revisit this old question that dates back to Hamilton's banking proposal back in 1789, 1791. Is the bank constitutional? Does the Constitution permit the federal government to create a bank? And this has always been the question from the very beginning. So that question is going to come up again during this case. Another important question that this case will raise is, does a state government have the authority to tax the federal government? Is that even possible? Is that allowed? How do we handle this situation? These are the two big issues at play here. So what ends up happening is that Supreme Court will make a ruling here. Of course, John Marshall is still the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. If you remember, we talked about him a week or so ago. So John Marshall, still the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, he is going to make a ruling here. Well, he and the court will make a ruling in this case, which will settle this, or attempt to settle this issue over the bank once and for all. But keep in mind, Marshall, has always supported the old Federalist perspective and a loose interpretation of the Constitution, as do many of the justices that are currently on the Supreme Court. So the Supreme Court will rule. Basically, it will be kind of a supporting a loose interpretation of the Constitution. The Federalists are going, or excuse me, the Supreme Court will rule in favor of this loose interpretation of the Constitution, supporting the bank, in favor of the bank. So basically, this two-part ruling that Marshall issues, and this is a unanimous. All the justices of the Supreme Court vote unanimously in favor of McCulloch and the U.S. Bank. First part of the ruling, basically, the Bank of the United States is constitutional in accordance with Article 1, Section 8, the Necessary and Proper Clause. The Bank of the United States is a necessary institution for the economic stability of the nation. Therefore, it is legal. It is a legal and constitutionally justified institution. So this is the first part of the court's ruling in this case. The bank is necessary and proper. So this kind of settles that debate, that old debate of whether or not the bank is authorized. So this first part of the ruling settles that debate. It further states that a state government cannot tax the U.S. bank or any other branch of the federal government for that matter, because inherently the power to tax is the power to destroy. And destroy is kind of a harsh word, but in essence, if you have the power to tax something or someone, you could essentially tax them out of existence. You keep raising the taxes higher and higher till that institution or that person can no longer afford to pay them, and then they would eventually go out of business. In the case of this branch of the U.S. Bank in the state of Maryland, in theory, if we allow the state of Maryland to tax the U.S. Bank, Maryland could tax the bank out of existence. Just keep raising the taxes until the bank can no longer afford to pay them, and then the bank, or at least that branch of the bank, would have to close up and move out of Maryland. So if we allow the states to have this power to tax the federal government, then it undermines the authority of the federal government. So basically, the Supreme Court rules that state governments cannot tax any branch or any part of the federal government. And this is an example of how the Supreme Court here is supporting a loose interpretation of the Constitution, or this old school Federalist perspective. So this settles the debate over the bank, or at least it appears to for the time being. The issue of the bank is going to come up again later on during Andrew Jackson's administration. We'll have a big crisis over the bank and what to do with it. But for the time being, McCulloch versus Maryland settles this debate over the bank. The bank is necessary and proper. It is legal according to the Constitution. And of course, the second part of the ruling is that the states cannot tax any branch or part of the federal government. This also further reinforces the fact that the state governments are subordinate to the federal government. Clearly, it establishes this hierarchy. The federal government has jurisdiction over the state governments. So it kind of reinforces that idea that the states are subordinate to the federal government. So McCulloch versus Maryland is an important ruling in that it establishes once and for all that the bank is legal under the Constitution, and it further reinforces the authority of the federal governments over the state governments. 1819 is a busy year. We've seen an economic crisis resulting in a recession and this panic spiraling out of control into a recession. So economic problems affecting the whole nation. We've seen a major Supreme Court ruling tied closely to that economic issues. But we're not done with 1819 yet. In the midst of all this economic and legal debate, there is a political crisis that explodes from Missouri's petition for statehood. And this is later on in the year. Again, 1819 has been kind of a rough year, and this Missouri crisis is kind of the icing on the cake, so to speak. It all began with the Missouri Territory petitioning Congress to join the Union as a state. And normally this is a pretty straightforward process. A territory, as a frontier territory, gains population and becomes settled once that population reaches 60,000. And you remember this from our first discussion of the Constitution. When a territory population reaches 60,000, that territory can elect a territorial legislature. They can draft a constitution, and they can petition Congress to join the Union as a state. So this process has already been established, and this is how every state after the original 13 have become members of the Union, is through this process. So the story begins, it's pretty straightforward, no problem. The problem will be that Missouri wants to join the Union as a slave state. Their slavery already exists in this Missouri territory. There's about 10,000 slaves in Missouri. A lot of people that have moved into this territory brought their slaves with them. So slavery already exists in this Missouri territory. So when the territory forms and ready to join the Union as a state, they naturally want to join as a slave state. This is where the problem really begins. So this crisis that will erupt over Missouri's petition for statehood will center around two key issues. First and foremost, the balance of power in Congress is going to be one of the central issues being debated in this Missouri crisis. Specifically, we talk about representation in the Senate. And we'll go more into that here in a second. The other key issue here is the expansion of slavery west of the Mississippi River. In the minds of a lot of people during this time, it was generally assumed, especially by people in the North, that the institution of slavery was dying out. Slavery had already been abolished by most northern states, or at least they had passed laws providing for the gradual elimination of slavery in their states. And all northern states had taken this route, and so there was this general assumption that slavery was dying as an institution. Here, the fact that Missouri wants to join the Union as a slave state suggests that slavery now is expanding into the frontier west of the Mississippi River. So these two issues, balance of power in Congress, especially in the Senate, and of course, to what extent slavery is going to be allowed to extend into those frontier territories. Both of these are going to be key issues in this debate over Missouri. Let's take a look at a map here, kind of better understand some of these issues and how they play into this Missouri crisis. First of all, balance of power in the Senate is very important at this time. We already have a growing sectional divisions between southern interests and northern interests. We've got a northern economy based on commerce and trade. We've got a southern economy founded on plantation agriculture. So two different economic ideas, and of course the political ideas are closely tied in with these economic policies. The nation is already somewhat divided in a couple of different areas. Now, the balance issue comes from the fact that there are an equal number of northern states and southern states at this point. In 1819, there are 22 states in the Union, 11 free states, and 11 slave states. And this balance is important, especially in the Senate, because in the Senate, states are represented equally. There's 2 senators from every state, regardless of how big they are. So in the Senate, every state has an equal vote. And in this case, with 11 free states, 11 slave states, the representation in the Senate is balanced equally among these two, or between these two sections of the nation. Northern interests and southern interests are represented equally in the Senate. And this is important because each section, with 50% of the representation of the Senate, can effectively block the agenda of the other side. And using slavery as an example here, we're talking about the expansion of slavery. If, say hypothetically, if Congress attempted to pass a bill restricting slavery in some way, let's say the House of Representatives proposes a bill that restricts slavery in some way. When that bill gets to the Senate, the southern states can block that bill from passing because they've got 50% of the vote. So with 50% of the vote, this bill cannot achieve any kind of a majority vote in order to pass. So even if every northern state votes to support this bill, all the southern states will vote to oppose it, and they'll have a 50-50 split, which means the bill will not pass. The bill is dead. Without a majority vote, this bill will never become a law. So this balance of power in the Senate is important for each side. It's important to the North and it's important to the South. Both sides have a great desire to maintain this balance because it allows them to effectively block the agenda of the other side. So what happens, where the problem comes, is that Missouri wants to join the Union as a slave state. It'll upset this balance. Now, prior to Missouri joining the Union, most of the states joined in pairs. There was a northern state and a southern state that joined at the same time. Ohio, Indiana, and Illinois joined around the same time as Alabama, Mississippi, and Louisiana. So three for three. So the balance was maintained as each of these states on the frontier joined the Union. Same thing with Tennessee and Kentucky. They joined around the same time and maintained a balance. So they joined around the same time as some of these other states in the north. But what happens is that Missouri joining the Union now, there's no other free states that are ready to join at this point, or at least that's what it seems to be. It's going to upset the balance. The southern states will have a representational advantage in the Senate, and the northern states are unhappy about this. So balance of power in the Congress, in the Senate, is threatened by by Missouri's wish to join the Union as a slave state. Another issue here regarding a balance is a territorial balance as well. Especially regarding the expansion of slavery. That's our other big issue here, the expansion of slavery. Missouri is going to be one of the first states to be carved out of this Louisiana territory that we got from France about 20 years ago. Now, Louisiana became a state soon after the Louisiana Territory became part of the United States. So this was technically the first state to be carved out of this territory, but they were already ready to become a state as soon as we got the territory. Missouri is the first state really to be carved out of this territory in a long time. West of the Mississippi River, this represents one of the first states to be carved out of our new frontier. If Missouri becomes a slave state, slavery will be expanding onto the frontier for the first time since Louisiana. This represents an expansion of an institution that a lot of people are hoping would just kind of fade out. It's not fading out, it's growing, it's expanding. Not only is slavery expanding onto the frontier, but if you look where Missouri is in terms of latitudinal range, slavery also appears to be expanding in a northern direction as well. Because up to this point, traditionally, the boundary between slave states and free states was the Ohio River, this Mason-Dixon line, the boundary between Pennsylvania and Maryland and the Ohio River all the way down to the Mississippi. This was the traditional boundary between free states and slave states. Now, this was never official. There was never any law or rule that established this as a legal boundary between slave and free territory. It was just kind of tradition. Well, Missouri clearly is north of this traditional boundary between slave and free territory. So on the map, it looks like slavery as an institution is expanding not only to the west, but it's also expanding to the north as well. And this makes Northerners very, very upset, especially when you consider the fact that the abolitionist movement, which we haven't really discussed yet, we'll get into that later on here in a couple weeks, but the abolitionist movement is beginning to take shape during this time frame. So in the minds of a lot of Northerners, there's this growing desire to see not only prevent slavery from expanding, but to actually reduce its current expanse as well. Missouri kind of flies in the face of this growing animosity toward the institution of slavery. So balance of power in the Congress and the expansion of slavery. These are the two big issues that are going to be set off by the Missouri's petition for statehood. In the midst of this controversy, a congressman from New York, James Talmadge, is going to introduce an amendment to Missouri's petition for statehood. So they'll take the petition for statehood from Missouri and they're going to amend it in this way that Talmadge is suggesting. Well, again, he's just suggesting this amendment. It still has to be approved by Congress. So Talmadge suggests that in the interest of consensus and compromise, let's revise Missouri's petition for statehood. Let's allow Missouri to come into the Union as a slave state with the condition that over the next few years, slavery would gradually be abolished in the state of Missouri. Basically, that no further slaves can be brought into Missouri. Whatever slaves are there now can stay there, but no new slaves can be brought into the state of Missouri. And slaves that are currently there would be freed once they reach age 25. So Talmadge is suggesting that, okay, we give the South an extra slave state. We allow Missouri to come in as a slave state, but we gradually provide for the elimination of slavery over the next few years or so, which will, of course, appeal to the North. So Talmadge is trying to come up with an idea that will appeal to both sides, that will satisfy both sides' desire here. Both sides will reject this. The Talmadge Amendment passes the House of Representatives, but it gets defeated in the Senate, and for reasons we just talked about. There's a 50-50 split in the Senate. 50% of the Senate votes to support the Talmadge Amendment, 50% oppose it. And since there's no majority vote, the Talmadge Amendment will not become part of Missouri's petition for statehood. So this doesn't settle anything. In fact, it further aggravates this debate over the expansion of slavery and the case of Missouri. What ends up happening is that both sides now will dig in their heels and start to fight more aggressively to protect their interests. Southerners will begin arguing constitutional protection over the institution of slavery. They'll cite the Fifth Amendment protection of private property. Prevents the federal government from eliminating slavery because it would basically be as if the federal government were seizing private property without due process of law, which is specifically prohibited by the Fifth Amendment. They'll also cite the 10th Amendment, which protects states' rights. Anything not covered in the Constitution as a federal law automatically becomes the jurisdiction of the states. Southern states are arguing here that since the Constitution does not specifically mention slavery, whether or not it's legal, then the states could decide for themselves whether or not to have slavery. So Southerners argue that Missouri's desire to become a slave state is protected by the Fifth Amendment. It's their choice, since the Constitution does not specify anything about slavery. So Southerners begin arguing that slavery is protected by the Constitution, by both the Fifth Amendment and the 10th Amendment. Northerners will start arguing for the first time that slavery is not a political issue, it's a moral issue. Up to this point, slavery has been debated off and on as a political issue. Specifically, if you remember way back, we started talking about the Constitution, the 3/5 Compromise. That was a debate over slavery and how the states would be represented in Congress. It was a political issue. Here again, this issue of balance of power in Congress is a political issue, and that's what starts this debate over slavery. But Northerners, for the first time, start making a moral argument against slavery. Slavery is a sin. It's immoral. It should not exist at all, much less should it be allowed to expand. So, the fact that Northerners are making this moral argument for the first time, and these are Northern congressmen, not just people from the North. Northern congressmen are making this moral argument. So they're bringing this morality, this moral issue of slavery into the congressional debate. And this is no real surprise because a lot of these Northern congressmen were elected by people who are starting to develop this issue, this moral issue against slavery. The abolitionist movement is beginning to take shape in the North, and a lot of these Northern congressmen were elected by those people. So they tend to reflect the attitudes and wishes of their constituents. So this moral argument now, which originated outside of the government, in society, Northern society, this moral argument now is starting to filter into Congress, and it becomes part of this debate. So both sides are arguing. Southerners are arguing for the protection of slavery. Northerners are arguing for the elimination of slavery, but both are arguing from different perspectives. Northerners are making a moral argument. Southerners are making a constitutional argument. Finally, this debate kind of reaches its height late in or early in 1820. So it's been going on for several months. Southerners actually began to threaten secession as a means of protecting slavery. Some of the more radical congressmen from the South, they start suggesting that secession is an option. Now, no Southern state really takes any kind of serious action on this. This is just, at this point, it's just a lot of talk. Northerners are starting to say that slavery is a sin, and Southerners are pushing back with this argument. They'll say, well, if we have to, we're not above secession as a means of protecting this institution. At this point, it's just a threat. No one is really serious about seceding at this point. This is just the nature of the debate, how the debate is evolving. So it's at this height of the debate where Southerners are now talking about secession as a potential means of protecting this institution, that a congressman from Kentucky, Henry Clay, is going to step up, and he's going to propose a compromise. Basically, when Clay introduces this compromise in 1820, this is the spring of 1820, March of 1820. This compromise is going to have three parts, and it's going to be an attempt to settle this debate and allow the nation to move on. And we'll take a look at our map again here to better understand the components of Clay's proposed compromise. Clay says as three parts. First part, Clay suggests that we allow Missouri to enter the Union as a slave state per their request with no restrictions. We don't change anything. We leave Missouri's petition for statehood as is. Missouri wants to be a slave state. That's what they want. So we'll allow that to take place. But we also allow Maine to join the Union as a free state. As it turns out, in 1819, Maine had already submitted a petition for statehood, but it had kind of gotten lost in the shuffle because of all this attention focused on Missouri and the expansion of slavery and so forth. Nobody had paid any attention to Maine's petition for statehood. Previously, Maine had been part of Massachusetts years ago, but with Vermont and New Hampshire, that basically split this Massachusetts territory into two, and there's enough people living here in this part of the state where they want to become their own state. So this had kind of gotten lost in the shuffle, but it was brought to Clay's attention by another representative. Clay decides to let's put them both together. Let's put Missouri's petition for statehood and Maine's petition for statehood in the same bill. So we'll allow one state to join the Union as a slave state, another state to join the Union as a free state, thus maintaining this balance of power in the Senate. That will make both sides happy. Of course, this will appeal to the South. They get, they get an extra slave state, which is what they wanted. Missouri, of course, has their right to choose protected by this bill as well, this compromise. And then Maine, of course, will maintain the balance between slave and free states. The third part of Clay's compromise is specifically aimed at addressing the issue of slavery expanding into the frontier. Clay suggests that we draw a boundary at the 36 degrees 30 minutes north latitude, which basically is the southern border of Missouri. We establish an official boundary between slave and free territory along this latitude. So for future reference, from now on, with the exception of Missouri, all the territory north of this latitude will be slavery will be prohibited. No new slave states north of this line, and of course any territory south of this line will be free and open to the expansion of slavery. So this suggestion that we establish an official boundary, of course the Mason-Dixon line will be will remain a traditional boundary. This 3630 latitude only pertains to lands west of the Mississippi River. So this suggestion, this part of Clay's compromise, is designed to appeal to the North. It establishes Northerners who are determined to prevent the expansion of slavery. at all, this will kind of satisfy them somewhat in that it'll take most of this Louisiana territory and close it off to any expansion of slavery. Southerners will get a little bit of an expansion here for the future, but not much. One of the reasons that Southerners will support this 3630 boundary is that from the Southern perspective, they don't see this Louisiana territory as very well suited for plantation agriculture. One of the reports of the Lewis and Clark expedition, they characterized this territory, the Great Plains, as a vast desert, unsuitable for any kind of farming because there were only a few rivers. There wasn't a whole lot of vegetation other than the prairie grass, and the ground was really hard, and they figured it would not be very well suited for agriculture. They, of course, were mistaken. We know this territory to be very fertile farmland today, but at this time in history, a lot of people believed, especially in the South, that this territory was not going to be suited for plantations anyway, so yeah, let the Northerners have it because we couldn't really do anything with it if we wanted to. So this Missouri Compromise that Clay proposes, it kind of settles the dust on this issue for the time being. Again, to recap, it allows Missouri to join the Union as a slave state. It allows Maine to join the Union as a free state, thus maintaining a balance of representation for both sections in the Senate. And it establishes an official boundary between slave territory and free territory west of the Mississippi River. And while this does not make both sides completely happy, it does satisfy everybody enough to be able to move on. This will get enough support in the Senate and it will pass. So this becomes official in 1820. So the importance of Clay's Compromise is that it does allow Congress to move past this issue. It allows both parties to get something of what they want. Not ideal. They didn't get everything they wanted, but they did get something, and it allows them to reach some sort of an agreement, a compromise. And that's just the nature of compromise. It allows both parties to get some of what they want and move forward. But it's important to remember that this Missouri Compromise does not settle the debate over the expansion of slavery. That all the underlying causes of this debate are going to continue on after 1820. All this does is it allows both sides to agree and move on, but it's a temporary fix. The issues that cause this crisis over Missouri don't go away. They will resurface every time we add new states to the Union. This issue is going to come up again. Later on down the road in the 1840s, when we acquire Texas and Texas wants to become a state, it's gonna rekindle this old debate or reignite this old debate over the expansion of slavery. When California wants to join the Union later on, and later on when Kansas wants to join the Union, each time this takes place, it's going to reignite this debate over the expansion of slavery. But this is where it begins, is with this Missouri crisis. So the issues don't go away. They just kind of subside for a moment and allow the nation to move on. Balance of power will always be an issue as long as there are slave states and free states. Each side is going to attempt to maintain this balance, or if possible, to gain an advantage. So this balance of power issue is going to be an ongoing issue. As the abolitionist movement grows in the North, and there's increasing pressure on Congress to do something about the expansion of slavery, to finally try to prevent the expansion of slavery, or even eliminate it altogether. As there's growing pressure from society to eliminate slavery, there's going to be increasing pressure from the South to protect it. So the issues that set off this Missouri crisis are going to linger on for the next 30 years. Keep in mind, we're still 30 years away from the Civil War at this point, but a lot of the issues that will feed into the Civil War are beginning to boil here in this Missouri crisis. And what's important about the Missouri crisis is that it will establish a pattern for how the debate over slavery takes place from now on for the next 40 years. Next 30 or 40 years, a up until the Civil War, the debate over slavery and its expansion will follow this pattern. Northerners will argue the moral implications of slavery. Southerners will argue constitutional protection of slavery, and secession will be one of these lingering threats that the Southerners offer up as kind of a last desperate course of action to protect their interests. So everything that comes up in this crisis of Missouri will be part of the debate from now on. Missouri crisis establishes the pattern. That's all we have for today. When we come back next time, we'll get into some other issues. Basically, the expansion of democracy leading up to the presidency of Andrew Jackson. And we'll talk about some of these how some of these issues will reignite the bank and so forth. We'll talk about that next time. Until then, take care.